Hey, welcome back to another episode of Falcon Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am Aaron, founder of FalFans.com, and I'm joined by my good friend Scott Karasik, a writer for the Bleacher Report. Or Bleacher Report, I'm sorry, I would say the Bleacher Report. You would think since I once upon a time worked for them, I get that right. But so anyway, today we are going to be talking about the Atlanta Falcons. We will be discussing the press conferences of the three coordinators that the Falcons hired, or two that they hired and one they retained, in Kyle Shanahan, Richard Smith, and Keith Armstrong. We will do our new regular segment of Squashing the Beef on a player. This week is going to be Rashid Hageman. And then, of course, as always, we will get to your mailbag questions at the end of the show. But I guess, Scott, we should open the show talking about the big event this week, the scouting combine. I think I have a couple of thoughts on combine.
I mean, the big thought is going into it, don't focus on one or two guys. Just use it as an information gathering session. As fans, we don't, like, these combine drills mean absolutely nothing in terms of actual performance on the field. They're good to list for athleticism. It does adjust the boards throughout. But the bigger thing that adjusts the boards is the interviews from the combine. You have some guys who come off extremely well, some guys who don't come off well at all. And there's a couple out there that really need a good, non-rehearsed combine interview, like a Dorial Green Beckham or a, I would say a Greg Hardy, because his agent's going to be up there trying to find the best deal for him real quick. Because there's no way he's going to stick in Carolina. But that's the big thing about the combine. It's more about the agents interacting with the teams and the players interacting with the teams on the interview side than anything else.
Yeah.
The tests are nice, the drills are nice, but that's really the main focus on it.
Yeah. I think the main thing with the drills is that it can create a little bit of separation between guys that are kind of bunched together. If this guy runs a 4.6 and has a 36-inch vertical, and this other guy runs a 4.75 and has a 33-inch vertical, then generally speaking, assuming that there isn't a wild discrepancy in terms of who's the better player on the field, the guy with a little bit more athleticism, may move up, 5 or 10 or 15 picks depending on where they're projected to go. So I think that's the one thing. If you're going to look at the drills, that's really what you're thinking about, as opposed to, oh, this guy ran a 4.4, that means he's going to be a first-round pick, sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm more interested in seeing how Eric Rowe runs a deep cover drill than I am about seeing Dante Fowler run a 40. I'm more interested in seeing how Vic Beasley sets the edge and then drops back in coverage in a coverage drill than about how he runs a, short shuttle.
The two drills that I enjoy watching the most are the offensive line kick slide drill and the wide receiver gauntlet drill. Those are my two favorite drills for some reason. Like, you can certainly say that they don't mean a whole lot, but they're just fun to sort of watch to see how polished the guy's footwork is, how smooth the guy is. And, the wide receiver gauntlet drill is just a fun thing to watch, I think, personally.
It's fun to watch, although I hate how they train them to drop the ball right after, because it's counterintuitive to what you really want them to do in a game.
Yeah. I think the one thing I like seeing is that you can really see who has natural hands, who can really pluck the ball out of the air, as opposed to the guys who kind of are a little stiff and shaky with that, letting the ball get into their body a little bit too much.
Well, with how bad this year's quarterback class is, you're really going to see how these guys can catch.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true.
And as awful as that is to say, that's just how I feel. There's like 3 draftable quarterbacks, and then that's about it.
Yeah. And my personal opinion is that the 3 draftable quarterbacks are going to be overrated because of how bad the other quarterbacks are. Like I don't think any of them are all that good, but because they're like the only three guys that are worth picking, people are going to jump all over those guys.
Well, I mean, they're legitimate starting caliber quarterbacks for the
Yeah,
NFL.
yeah, I think they're starting caliber quarterbacks. I don't know if they're necessarily good starters, but I think you can win games with them.
Here's the litmus test. Are they better than Andy Dalton? If you're saying yes,
Yeah.
then they're worth drafting in the first round because they're a top 20 quarterback in the NFL. If you're saying no, then they're not worth a first round pick.
That's a fair assessment. That's a fair assessment.
Because when it comes to quarterbacks, he's the borderline, like, no, not really. Like, Nick Foles should not be starting an NFL game.
Okay.
But because he's just slightly worse than Andy Dalton, and because Chip Kelly's a genius, he can look really good.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, let's get into these coordinators' press conferences.
All right. Let's talk about Kyle Shanahan first, since he had the longest one. I guess there's a little bit more to talk about with him. So I guess the big thing was, at least for me, it was zone blocking, which was kind of confirmed that we kind of knew that was going to happen. And it was deep passing, Scott. Isn't that amazing that the Falcons, he said, Falcons, other teams are going to have to defend the deep ball. That has never been said in Atlanta since like 1998. And I'm looking forward to that.
It was said in 2002.
Okay. All right. Okay. There you go. I kind of blocked out all those big years.
Yeah, I kind of did too. But yeah, deep passing. I'm going to enjoy it. Kyle Shanahan obviously loves Julio Jones.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah, who wouldn't love Julio Jones? Says that he reminds him of a young Andre Johnson, which I'm okay with that comparison, but I think he's a lot faster than a young Andre Johnson.
That's probably true. But Andre Johnson was the guy I compared to Julio to when he came out. When the big debate was Julio versus A.J. Green. Julio, to me, was more Andre Johnson in terms of his physicality, his size, his ability to catch short and deep. And A.J. Green, to me, was more Randy Moss, that I thought he was ideally a vertical receiver as opposed to a quote-unquote possession receiver. But, yeah, I agree with you about Julio being probably a step or two faster than a young Andre Johnson.
Oh, yeah. Great player. Kyle Shanahan's going to love him in his scheme. And if you've got a chance to draft Julio Jones for your fantasy league, do it, because wide receiver ones and Kyle Shanahan's offense, all I'm going to say is Calvin Johnson better watch out if Julio Jones stays healthy all 16 games, because he can come for that yardage record.
Yeah.
More than that, he can get 12 to 13 touchdowns.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. Definitely looking forward to it.
And what's nice about the Shanahan offense is it does emphasize wide receiver one, but it does kind of de-emphasize the other wide receivers. To where if you've got three guys who get 600, 700 yards, or three guys who get 500 yards even, it's no big deal because you got that one guy getting 1,800 yards.
Yeah. I think a lot of that has to do with how much emphasis it's on the running game is really your wide receiver two, sort of in the sense of what carries your offense, the running game, and whoever that number one receiver is, as opposed to what the Falcons have been, which has basically been wide receiver one, wide receiver two, and tight end one with Tony Gonzalez in the past.
Now it's going to be wide receiver one, running game, tight end one, wide receiver two. So Roddy's going to have to get used to being a later option, but everybody else is going to be perfectly happy with it. I think Roddy's a good second wide receiver as long as you don't have him as the second total option for your offense.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I really hope they move Roddy to the slot where I think he can. Is probably the only place where he can really create mismatches nowadays. When you get him lined up against linebackers and safeties, I just don't see him being that guy that can really do that against quality starting corners. We'll see. Hopefully we get the upgrade to tight end.
Yeah, that was the big thing I noticed is Shanahan mentioned tight end. He's got to be able to block. He's got to be able to run. He's got to be able to, and by run I mean like stretch the middle of the field run. So the more he goes on about what he wants in a tight end, the more I'm thinking Max Williams is that second round pick. And if it's not going to be him, it's going to be Clive Walford. Because they both fit exactly what he wants.
Yeah, I agree with you on Williams, even though I do think there's a decent chance that Williams goes in the first round. Walford, I would be very shocked if he went in the first round. But, I'm not as high on Walford as other people seem to be. But, I think he does have developmental potential down the road. But I don't know if I would trust him to be the starter right from day one.
He understood a lot more than he showed when he was in the Senior Bowl for Mobile.
Okay.
Or Mobile for the Senior Bowl. He looked so much better running pro routes than he did running those goofy Miami combination routes that he was running. I would love to see him run these option routes full time, especially with Matt Ryan. I think he and Matt would get along great. And he learned and he picked up and he improved every day in practice, and he took very well to coaching. I don't see a way the Falcons could get him in the third round, but if he did fall that far, he'd be more than worth the pick, and he'd start over Toilolo instantly. Because he's just so much better than Toilolo.
Yeah. Can't disagree with that. So, I thought it was interesting that they asked him a lot of questions about what his preferences in running back, and basically Kyle Shanahan said, I like good running backs, which is a pretty good answer, which basically means whether it's a speed guy or a power guy, basically as long as you can make that one downhill cut that the outside zone scheme requires on the stretch play, you're good to go in his book.
So he wants guys with great vision who understand how to one cut and go and burst through the hole. So basically not Todd Gurley, not Steven Jackson. He wants more of that Melvin Gordon, Amir Abdullah, even a Sinjin Days or a David Cobb. Those are the backs he wants.
Okay, yeah, I guess I could. We talked about Gurley, whether he was a great fit in the scheme, and I agreed with you that he's not an ideal fit in the I wouldn't say ideal. I'd say he's not a perfect fit. But I do think if he's there at a certain point in the draft, I think the Falcons would draft him just because of the value is too good to pass up. And,
don't get me wrong. If he's there with the second round pick, I don't see how you pass him up. That's just because I have him as the best running back in the draft. I think he's worth a first-round pick, and I hate taking running backs in the first round. That being said, I still don't think he's the ideal fit for Atlanta.
I agree with you. I agree.
Don't get me wrong. He'll be very successful no matter where he goes. But he'll be more successful if he goes to a man scheme. That pulling block, basically what Atlanta was running last year under Tice. If he goes to that scheme, he'll be a 2,000-yard back. In Atlanta, he's like a 1,300-yard back.
Yeah. Okay.
He'll still be a 4.5 yards a carry running back and give you that big play every now and again. But he's gonna have a lot of 1 and 2 yard runs to get there. And I don't think Falcons fans really want to see that again.
Yeah, I think there's a bigger learning curve with Gurley in the zone blocking scheme than there probably would be with other running backs, who I think would just kind of, automatically just fit right away. But I do think if you do draft Gurley, it's not necessarily because he's going to come in right away and be this sort of Eddie Lacy type of running back in the scheme. But I do think potentially down the road you can get that sort of player in year 2, year 3, where he can be that sort of workhorse, top 10, top 5 running back in the league. But we'll figure it out when we get there. But it's obviously the Falcons have a lot of options at running back, so it's not as if it's Gurley or.
And I did also see that he mentioned that he really liked Devontae Freeman coming out last year.
Yep.
He had a little bit of a smile that he was finally going to get to work with him, which kind of warmed my heart because I said the ideal fit for Devontae Freeman coming out was going to be his zone scheme.
I agree.
And as a graphic I posted earlier in the week showed, you don't need a first-round pick, or even really a second-round pick, to have a great running back for the zone blocking scheme.
It is very true.
Some of the best work in the zone blocking scheme was done with, sixth-round picks?
Yeah.
Mike Anderson, Terrell Davis.
Alfred Morris.
Don't get me wrong, some of these guys are just true talents. But like Olandis Gary was taken in the 4th. Selvin Young was undrafted. Now, if you could get a Clinton Portis in the 2nd round, you take it. Or Jay Yaji in the 3rd round, who would be the next Clinton Portis, you take it. But Alfred Morris was taken in the 6th. And I think you've got that same running back out there in St. John Davis. Arian Foster was undrafted. You've got a couple similar guys out there who are going to be there in the 4th, 5th, 6th round.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think the proof is in the pudding that you don't need a top quality running back in order to make the zone blocking scheme work. But I do want to point out that I do think a lot of those teams kind of lucked into those players as opposed to, Houston planned on having Arian Foster step up. Washington didn't plan on having, Alfred Morris step up. They just kind of showed up one day in camp and were like, oh, wow, we really found this really good player, as opposed to they went into that draft like, we don't need to draft a running back because we're going to get Arian Foster as an undrafted free agent. So I think Falcon fans should probably temper a little bit in thinking, we can just wait until the 6th round and we'll get our running back of the future because other teams have been successful and able to do that. I don't think that's a smart plan to have.
One thing they always do is take a running back. You take one in the 6th round every year.
Yeah.
You take one in free agency every year. That way you increase your chance of hitting on it.
Yeah, that's basically what Denver did. They after they traded Portis, they basically drafted a running back every year, and 2 running backs every year, because usually one of them didn't make it and one of them did. Examples of guys that didn't make it were Maurice Claret, a guy from Pitt, and Brandon Myree, Chris Howard or somebody. I can't think of all the guys that they drafted, but they drafted a whole bunch of running backs when Shanahan was there. Mike Shanahan was there. And probably they hit on about 50% of them. But, that's the sort of strategy. You just basically keep drafting them, and, whether it's Ruben Drowns or Olandis Gary or Clinton Portis, somebody eventually is going to step up and fill that role. And they were successful doing that. And hopefully the Falcons can start doing that as well.
I'm going to be the devil's advocate on that one and saying that you can do it. But I know your view is take one in the 3rd round, 2nd round, 1st round every year. Well, maybe not 1st round, but 2nd round every year. I just, ooh.
No, I think my view is this. It's not necessarily that you. I think if you're going to commit to being a run team, then you need to invest in your running game. And by maximizing the talent level of your running back position, I think you can really make a significant investment in your running game because I think a lot of people think, oh, well, all it is about getting a good offensive line. You can put anybody, and that's true, sure. But getting a good offensive line is a lot easier said than done. I mean, like you look at the teams that have had really good offensive lines that could, just mash dudes, and you could put any running back behind them and be successful. How many teams, like the Giants in '07, the 49ers a couple of years ago, the Cowboys now? How many other teams can you really say that about over the last like 5 or 6 years? And so I think, when you look at a player like Adrian Peterson, he can run behind any offensive line. That Vikings line from like 2013 was terrible, and he still got like 1,300 yards that year. And so if you have that sort of running back, then it takes pressure off your ability to have this great offensive line. Now, obviously, the beauty of the zone blocking scheme is you don't have to have, a Mike Iupati or a Chris Snee out there road grading. You can kind of, have, you have Dwayne Brown and then kind of Chris Myers and like three other average guys, and you'd be good to go. But we'll see what happens.
And I think Atlanta's got better players than that. Because I think Jake Matthews has the potential to be a way better version of Dwayne Brown. For sure. I think Ryan Schrader is like a skinny Tyson Clabo. I think Joe Hawley's your Chris Myers right there. And then Asamoah, Asamoah is a hell of a player. And Blaylock's a good player who may not be, he's the octagon peg, but if he loses some weight and gets his back healthy, shoot, why not?
Yeah, I think we have players. I think right now I wouldn't put. I need to see Hawley stay healthy for a year. I need to see what improvement Schrader can make this year before I really set that in ink. I agree with you on Matthews. Asamoah has proven it for the last 5 years that he's a good player. I think Matthews is going to get there eventually if he can stay healthy. The other guys, not to say the other guys stink or anything. I just think whether they're going to be assets or just kind of okay starters, we'll have to see.
I think they're at least going to be above average for their position, which, you know what I've always said, you give me 5 average offensive linemen, I'll give you a top 5 offensive line. Because it's not about each individual talent, it's about how they work as a group.
Yeah.
And I think if you put those 5 guys out there in a group together, they'll work very well. Because Asamoah and Hawley, that connection is there. Hawley and Blaylock, that connection is there. Blaylock and Matthews, that connection is there. And Asamoah Schrader on the other side, that connection is there. So when you've got the connection the whole way down the line, you're really just making sure it fits as a group for that zone. Teaching guys who've done a little bit of zone blocking already how to maximize their zone blocking skills and how to communicate when communication was the biggest thing Mike Tice preached last year. That alone is going to be huge for them. They're getting very similar things to what they've already been taught. And Chris Morgan may not have been in charge of an offensive line before, but he knows the scheme like the back of his hand because it's all he's ever been under. Tom Cable in Oakland, Tom Cable in Seattle, Shanahan in Washington, which under Shanahan you're running zone blocking schemes. So.
No, I agree. I'm certainly, I may sound pessimistic, but I'm certainly optimistic our offensive line can gel together. It's just, you mentioned Chris Morgan, and I agree with you. I like some of the things that he can do, but it is a little bit of a question mark because he's always been an assistant offensive line coach, and it'll be, particularly with Schrader, I think is the one guy I'm really focused on. He showed a lot of growth last year under Mike Tice, and so I'm wondering whether or not he'll continue on that upward trend, or if he just kind of levels out, under Morgan. We'll see. I don't know. I'm not going to make any predictions, but it's one of those things where I kind of have to see it in order to believe it. So
I would be okay if he leveled out, though, and consistently looked good.
yeah, I'm not going to complain about it. I mean, considering what we've gotten at that position over the last couple of years, him just being the guy that he is right now, that's fine. I can live with that. I'm not going to lose any sleep over that.
Like, if he continues to give multiple good games every single week, like he had a stretch where he had a plus 10.5 on Pro Football Focus over a 5-game stretch. If he does that all year, hell, if he does half of that all year, he's already one of the top tackles in the league. Definitely one of the top right tackles in the league. Hell, he might be the top right tackle in the league if he does that all year. He looks really good for limited snaps. I'd love to see him get the starting job next year. He was comparable to Doug Free. He was a better pass blocker, and then his run blocking sucks because he's not a fit for that scheme that they were in, that man scheme. So I think if you put him in that zone scheme, you get a way better version.
I don't disagree.
But all right, let's see. A couple of quick things I wanted to note, and it goes to playing guys where they win. Shanahan basically said it once. He wants to develop an offense where the players are comfortable in the scheme and play where they win, and if they're not comfortable doing something, to let him know and say, hey, I understand this might be where we win, but I'm not comfortable doing it. How do I either get more comfortable or can we scrap? Also said, adjusting throughout the game, based on his sound concepts that he believes in, and not to outthink himself. So those were just, let's put it this way. One quote summed it all up. Good coaches are about putting their players in good situations.
Okay. Yeah. I can't disagree with that. It's spot on.
So, I mean, that's what an NFL coach needs to do, and I don't feel like Mike Smith ever did that. Mike Smith, said, I'm gonna run my scheme. I'm not gonna fit my scheme to my players. These coaches are saying, give me talent, we'll fit our schemes to the players. Completely different train of thought.
I think that's a fair criticism for the Falcons the last year or two. I don't necessarily know if that's a fair criticism for what they were in 2008 to 2012, but whatever.
Well, that's because they had a vision in 2008 to 2012. All right. Talks about the up-tempo offense. Says he doesn't need it, but he liked it. So I'm a fan of that.
Well, if you're talking about putting players, in the position where they win, I think it's obvious that Matt Ryan wins running no huddle. So I don't think there would be any reason to scrap that. So I think that's pretty much where it goes.
The thing with Matt Ryan and the no huddle, though, I think he does well with the no huddle more as just like a general offense than as an up-tempo pace offense.
Okay.
Like in 2012, he ran a lot of no huddle where he would just go out there, he'd call 3 or 4 plays, they'd run these 3 or 4 package plays together, and then they'd come back and huddle up after basically, a guy went out of bounds or they got a major gain or something like that. He'd call another 3 plays and then go out there and run those plays. So I prefer that from Matt Ryan, not forcing the tempo, but forcing the no huddle, like letting him call the plays, call the shots up the line, because he knows his offense. You don't have to worry about a guy knowing the offense like Matt Ryan does. We've compared him to Peyton Manning throughout his career because of how intelligent he is, and because he may not have the biggest, the biggest, strongest arm, but he's still a very good player. And then the one thing I'm going to say before I get into this last thought, he looked like he hated everybody at that press conference. He was just like, screw the media. I don't like any of you. Quit asking me questions. Let me go do my job.
Yeah. If people have, go back on YouTube and basically there was a moment at like about the minute 42 mark where D-Led interrupted him and he gives this look off camera to somebody who was in that room. I have no idea, but it's just kind of this look like, who is this guy, And I think, Kyle Shanahan gets that from his dad. His dad was probably, outside of maybe Bill Belichick, probably the media's, I guess, not the biggest fan of the media. And so I think Kyle kind of inherited that sort of attitude towards the media from his father. So see a little bit of that.
Yeah, he gave that eye roll, that look of disdain whenever D-Led asked him a question. So Falcons fans were kind of right there with him on that one. Not a lot of love from Falcons fans about D-Led. We understand he's got a job to do and he's like the most entrenched guy there, but he could improve his coverage from where it's at.
Good old D-Led.
That's just an honest criticism. I'm sure I've got things like, hey, Scott, stop being a dickwad. Like,
okay. I didn't say it, you said it.
I'm just putting that out there. I am kind of a dickwad sometimes. It happens. All right. The one final thing I want to get into, in scouting free agents and draft picks, someone asked him, hey, and this is a great question. I don't know who asked it, but whoever asked it was brilliant. When scouting offensive guys in free agency, we know you have certain things you look for, but do you ever ask the defensive staff, hey, who's the guy you had the game plan for the most? And do you ever give the defensive staff, hey, check out these guys because they really stood out on film that I had to protect against? I thought that was brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Because he said sometimes guys step up and they look great against an offense and they stand out, but to the defensive staff they go, oh man, they gave up way too many negative plays.
Yeah. Cross scouting. That was interesting because I noticed last year with Cleveland, Mike Pettit in Cleveland, one of the things that they did during the bye week was basically they scouted their own team. So the defense scouted the offense, and the offense scouted the defense. And basically during the bye week, they shared information on, basically help them game plan. I think that was one of the reasons why the Browns were successful. It's not to say that they're the only team that does that, but it has a smart attitude to maximize your bye week. To basically tell the other one, oh, you're doing this a little bit too much. If we were scheming against you, if we were game planning against you, we would game plan against this. And so that gives the offensive staff a little bit of better idea of, okay, maybe we shouldn't do that. But, that probably didn't happen in Atlanta based off of how they played last year.
Yeah, you can pretty much guarantee that it didn't happen last year.
All right, so Scott, you want to talk about Richard Smith's press conference?
Yes, we probably should.
Well, it was interesting seeing Richard Smith talk for the first time, since he's the kind of the new guy that no one has any clue who he is, sort of guy. But he's one of the few coaches that Dan Quinn hired that has a lot of experience. It seemed like a lot of what he was saying about what he's looking for on defense was echoing a lot of what Dan Quinn said in his opening press conferences, which was, kind of playing a fast and physical, adding more speed on defense, it seemed like simplifying sort of the scheme and having guys just kind of read and react and basically just see football, go get football, hit that guy who has the football sort of defense.
Sounds like he wants to run the very basic scheme they ran in Seattle, too. Because he made it sound like Quinn's just bringing in that Seattle scheme and he's going to fit the players to the scheme for some of it and fit the scheme to the players for the rest of it.
Yeah.
Like that Bobby Wagner role with the middle linebacker that rarely is in man coverage is probably going to be good for a certain Falcons middle linebacker. That weak side linebacker role where he's playing a lot of coverage and he is going to be manned up every now and again is going to be great if they resign Weatherspoon. And if Weatherspoon is 100% healthy, he could have a monster here.
Yep. I agree.
But it does kind of give you a blueprint for what they need. Like what they really need. And free safety, they either need Salvador to step up or they need someone to come in and take that role, like Devin McCourty.
Okay. It ain't happening. People can dream.
People can dream, or they've got to hit on someone in the mid rounds that no one's expecting them to hit on, like a Eric Rowe. I really like him as the deep safety.
Okay. I'm still pushing that Raheem Moore bandwagon, but I seem to be alone on that one.
Wait, what?
I'm still pushing that Raheem Moore bandwagon, but I seem to be alone on that one.
You're gonna be alone on that one. You're gonna stay alone on that one. He had compartment syndrome, man. I'm not trusting him until he shows he can still run that same sub 4.5 that he ran in the combine. Until he shows it on the field, I'm not gonna trust him. Not as the last line of defense. He can't cover deep anything. That was his biggest problem this past year. He was awful at it.
Okay.
So I've just gone back and I watched a couple Denver tapes and I was like, nah, there's no way Aaron's really touting Raheem Moore.
I think he's got the potential. And I think when you look at the options the Falcons will have available to him, I think he's number one option to throw.
I'd rather throw out an extremely raw Desmond Southward than go out and sign Raheem Moore.
All right, good luck with that.
I'd rather go out and sign Byron Maxwell and move him to free safety than throw out Raheem Moore.
Okay.
I just think it's a bad fit. Yeah, that if he gets signed by the Falcons, we'll be on the first quash to beef, which was similar to a Dwight Lowery one.
Okay.
But no, I'm not a Raheem Moore fan. Anyway, back to this press conference. One thing he said was he wants fundamental and attacking. And how attacking is not all about blitzing and, forcing the offense to do the defense's will, but it's about making sure that the players understand, hey, go get the ball. Create turnovers. So.
Yeah.
And I like how he also said sacks matter and total pressures also matter. Let's bring the quarterback down and not just force him off his spot.
Well, that's going to be a point of emphasis. Pass rush, which has not been a point of emphasis in Atlanta since 06 or 07, maybe if you count Jamal Anderson draft pick as a point of emphasis. But
and then he did talk about a couple of things that I've been preaching for a while, which is develop the talent that you have. And says that the defensive staff is full of guys who teach technique above all, who are motivating and they fire people up. But he said the team already played hard. He alluded to the fact that the team played stupid, but they still played hard. Like, the technique wasn't there, but they were trying. Like Babineau was in the 7 technique, but he was still trying and still playing it, despite the fact that he didn't look great playing it. Because as you'll agree with me, Babineau is not a defensive end.
Not ideally.
He's a 3 technique. And at this point, a guy who needs to be playing 40% of the snaps and not 80.
Yeah, I mean, he plays that much because they don't have better options.
They do. They've got a pair of better options that they've been benching.
Corey Peters, we'll probably talk about one of those guys later. But yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later.
They should have at least been playing Corey Peters over him.
Over Babineau?
Yeah.
I'm not going to go there, but over Soley, I'm sure. But over Babineau, no, I wouldn't go there.
No, I'm even saying like a 60-40 split at 3 technique, because Peters can at least pass rush for the 3. He may not be Babineau, but he can pass rush.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I can't disagree with that.
But he's a better run stuffer than Babineau is.
Yes, that is definitely true. Babineau is not a run stuffer. He's a penetrator that blows up.
First and second down, you have Peters in there. And then a long down, you have Babineau.
That's fair. Couldn't complain about that.
The last thing I'm going to go over on Richard Smith, because he was kind of bland too, is he said that there's talent already in Atlanta, but it would be nice to get a premier pick.
Yeah, I think that probably goes without saying. Yeah, so it's nice to hear from him.
Quinn basically said, I need a couple of pass rushers. And then Smith relayed that to people at the press conference.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think that's basically what happened. And then he trusts Quinn as the play caller, meaning it's Quinn's defense, not his.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now let's get into Keith Armstrong's boring press conference.
Special teams matters.
That was the message. Special teams matter. We got to get faster. Speed. And we might play a starter on punt coverage.
Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of, groundbreaking questions you can ask about special teams, especially since the Falcons, pretty good, on special teams. Devin Hester, Matt Bosher, Matt Bryant, even that Josh Harris is pretty good now. So it's like there's not a whole lot of questions that you could have said, hey, Keith Armstrong, what do you think about this? No, it's like I'm going to keep my kicker, I'm going to keep my punter, I'm going to keep my kick returner, I'm going to keep my long snapper. That's really about it.
Yeah, basically, it's like, well, what do you think about working with Devin Hester? Hester's a legend. Why the fuck would I get rid of him?
Yeah. So. I do think it was interesting, though, that we might see some starters on punt coverage. It made me think about which guys we might see get more work on punt coverage. Maybe Paul Warlow. I don't know.
He wasn't great on punt coverage. Like, he's not a special. He wasn't great on punt coverage when he did it as a rookie.
He was better than Joplin too.
Joplin Bartu, definitely. If Joplin Bartu is playing strong side linebacker next year, which isn't an ideal situation, but it's a possibility, he's probably going to be on punt coverage. If Desmond Salward is starting at free safety, he'll probably still be on punt coverage. Because let's be honest here, he was a badass on punt coverage this year.
Yeah, outside the one play where he broke Antoine Smith's leg, that was about the only negative thing I could say.
To be fair, that was a freak accident.
It was.
Like a total freak accident. And he was probably like, I can't believe I just totally screwed our long running game. The entire season.
Yeah, he got blocked into Antoine.
He did also get blocked. so it's not that bad.
Yeah. Oh, well. Oh, I miss you, Anton. Hopefully you'll be back next year.
I agree.
So you want to squash the beef on Rashid Hageman? Might as well
We
get up.
probably should.
All right. So people that have watched us the last couple of weeks, we've talked a little bit about Jonathan Massaquoi, Paul Warlow. Am I missing somebody?
Yeah, you're missing somebody. Kamal Ishmael.
Oh, yeah, Kamal Ishmael. I forgot he was on the team. No, so basically this is typically what this has been is Scott saying why this player is good and me saying why this player is not as good as Scott says. So, you guys be the judge on who wins. So we'll start this off of how good do we think Rashid Hageman is now? Now, for me, I think Hageman has shown the flashes. Let me say this. I had very, very, very low expectations for what Hageman was going to do his rookie season based off what he did at Minnesota, based off what he did in the preseason. He far exceeded those expectations, but again, they were probably about as low as you could possibly get. But he did show flashes of ability. I think right now he's a rotational player. He's solid rotational player. I don't think he's ready to be a starter quite yet. I do think he can get there probably by the end of this season. But I would not put him in the position right now where I think he should start for this Falcon team. That's where I think he is now.
And I'm on the flip side of that.
Not surprised.
I think it doesn't matter what technique, whether it's 1, 3, or 5, you put him on that starting offensive line. No, defensive line. Just put him out there. Ideally, play him at the 1 and have Soliai rotate in for the big rundowns, but have Hageman as the main one playing that spot. And on the big rundowns, have it be Soliai and Hageman with Hageman as the 3. And then on pass down, slide Hageman back inside and move Babineau to 3.
Okay.
That's where I think we're at. Now, how good can he be? He's not going to be Richard Seymour setting the edge, getting 8 sacks off the edge. He's just not an edge rusher. I don't understand the purpose of trying to make him one when at best down the edge he's going to be Red Bryant. I think if you move him inside, you keep him inside, you keep him as a 3 or even a 1 technique, he's got that potential to be at least Kawan Short. If not one of those game changers like an Ndamukong Suh.
Okay.
That's his level of potential inside.
Okay. I don't quite see him getting there. I do see, the Kawan Short comparison is a fair comparison on paper. I don't know if Hageman really is agile enough to be that sort of pass rusher that Kawan Short is. But we'll see what happens. I do think the thing about Hageman was that the thing I noticed when he was at Minnesota was he was the most effective as a pass rusher when he played the 5 technique. But I do think, I think, let me see if I can explain this better. I think how good can he be? I think he can be a dominant 2-down defender. I think he can be a poor man's John Henderson, who was a dominant 2-down player, who played 3rd downs but wasn't a great pass rusher. That's who I think Hageman has the potential to be. I think he could be basically what Red Bryant was in Seattle, which was basically a black hole against the run. And, whether that's playing the 5 technique or the 3 technique or the 1 technique, I think he's capable of playing all 3 techniques. I think if he moves around a lot, that'll be a way to sort of get him into some, prominent matchups to take advantage of his skills. but I don't see him being this great force as a pass rusher. He can be a 2 or 3 sack guy, get maybe 10 or 15 pressures a year. But other than that, I don't see that. That to me doesn't qualify as a great pass rusher. That's a rotational guy, situational guy at best.
So why do you hate him?
I don't hate him. I just not. I was one of those people that wasn't super super high on him coming out of the draft because I thought he was. I had heard for months and months how talented he was, and what I'd seen briefly of him, prior to him getting drafted, I saw flashes of potential, but I didn't see that great player that people were making him out to be. I don't see an every down dominant player. I see a 2 down dominant player, and I see, basically a very rich man's Jamal Anderson more so than the next Richard Seymour.
That's kind of messed up. But unlike Jamal Anderson, I don't think he's going to be playing edge rusher.
Okay.
And I'll answer my side of why I love him. There's explosion that you can get off the ball. There's very few people out there who have the kind of explosion that he has. Aaron doesn't want to admit it because it, makes him look bad. But he's one of the most explosive people to have come out of the draft in at least over the past 5 years. I've got a measure that I use for combine measurements that goes over the 10-yard split, that goes over the vertical jump, and includes the weight. It comes out with a horsepower measurement. And there's only been 33 players since 2009 with a higher horsepower rating than he has. Higher explosion rating, if you will, than he has. And of those, along the defensive line, they've been pretty successful. I mean, you got Glenn Foster, who even in his short time in New Orleans looked pretty solid. You got Michael Johnson. You've got Brian Orakpo, who I want the Falcons to sign for this very reason. J.J. Watt scored extremely high on the score. Ndamukong Suh got ridiculous numbers on the score. Clowney got ridiculous numbers. B.J. Raji. And then, let's see, Kareem Martin was the only other one that scored higher along the guys that would be playing that 3 to 5 tag.
Okay. Now, to play devil's advocate, outside of Sue and Watt, most of the guys you named were role players, but it's fine.
Michael Johnson wasn't a role player.
He had one good year. And then he was basically a good number 3 defensive end. And then the Bucs overpaid him.
I don't think
he's not a bad player, but he's not a great player either.
I do think that it works better for interior guys than exterior guys.
That may be fair.
And it's one of those things that the film has to back up. But B.J. Raji's not exactly. Since the past couple of years, he hadn't been good, but his first couple of years in the league, he was excellent.
Yeah, we had 6 really great games that year that the Packers won the Super Bowl. And
all in a row, all in the playoffs.
Yeah. Wouldn't mind that if the Hageman could do that, if the Falcons make a playoff run.
If Hageman gave those games all the time, you'd completely change your tune.
I would. Look, and people would think I'm a Hageman. I'm not a Hageman hater. I don't hate him. I just don't think he's going to be the player that a lot of people think he's going to be. I think he's going to be a different kind of player. I think he can be a very good player. Again, Red Bryant is not a great pass rusher, but he was a pivotal piece of that Seahawks defense for 3 or 4 years because of how great a run defender he was. I think that's more what Hageman is going to be, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I just don't think that's going to be an every down pass rusher like a Babineau or even a Corey Peters. That's it.
All right, let's get to these mailbags.
Okay. All right, another beast successfully squashed, maybe. All right, West Country Falcon. He has a question. He has a couple of questions. His first one is: did the Falcons intend to take a project with their third-round pick last year in Southward, given their multiple holes on the team, or did they expect too much from him?
I think they knew he was a project, but they loved what they showed him at the Senior Bowl, and that was really why they brought him in. They really, really liked him at the Senior Bowl. He's a highly intelligent guy. He's extremely athletic. The only real issue that comes from him is he's still very raw at the position. I think if you simplified the position for him completely and just said, hey, you're supposed to cover this deep third, and that's it, it'd make him a lot better. They did expect way too much from him. I think if you lessen the role, you've got a better player. I also think that they were expecting Dwight Lowery to win the job so that they could have a guy learn for a year or two and then take over.
I think, from my answer there, I think it's a little bit of both. I think they knew he was going to be a project. I think they knew the likelihood was that he was going to take at least a year to develop. But I also think they were kind of optimistic that they might have struck gold with him, which is one of the reasons why they didn't go out and sign a veteran safety until halfway through the season, because they were hoping that, well, you know, if Lowry gets hurt and Sauer has to play, he can kind of learn on the job, and we can sort of develop him on the field. So I think it's a little bit of both. They knew he was a project, but they were kind of hoping that he would, you know, step up and, you know, prove them wrong. All right, West Country's got a second question. He asks, what is the upside of the seemingly forgotten Marquise Sproul? How does he fit into Dan Quinn's defensive scheme?
He could be that starting strong side linebacker, and it wouldn't shock me at all. He's very good in coverage. He's extremely fast. The issue that I had with him came from basically playing against the run. But the big thing about Quinn's scheme is you've got a 5 technique or a 6 technique defensive end who, if it's going to be, whether it's Malachi Goodman or Tyson Jackson or whoever it is, it's a guy whose main job is to be a black hole against the run, as Aaron says, and suck in as many blockers as possible to where that guy plays like he's basically a second weak side linebacker and plays pretty clean. And I think Sproul would do very well in that spot. How well does he blitz is one question that I'd have. He looked good last year on interior guns, like on interior double A-gap blitzes, but I would love to see him off the edge. I would love to see what he could do off the edge with his speed in Quinn's scheme. But he does have a good fit. Worst case scenario, you've got a really good special teamer and a really good backup weak side linebacker.
To no one's surprise, I'm not quite as high on Sproul as Scott is. I do like his speed. I do like his range, but I think ultimately, if all you are is fast, then there isn't a whole lot to work with. At least as a linebacker, I think one of the issues Sproul had was defeating blockers. He was very bad against that while he was at Syracuse. It'll be interesting to see how much improvement he can make, because you at some point as a linebacker in the NFL, you have to beat blockers, regardless of who's playing in front of you. The other interesting thing is how much speed is he going to lose from having the ACL tear. But I do think Sproul can find a role with the team, probably on special teams. I think that's always been sort of where his upside lies. I don't necessarily see him as a option to be a starter, but, you know, stranger things have happened. You know, no one really thought of Malcolm Smith being a potential, you know, key player in that Seahawk defense a couple of years ago. So, you know, Sproul is probably a poor man's Malcolm Smith.
And that's perfectly, I would agree with that. Again, I'm not saying he's going to instantly be great, but I'm giving you a best case scenario.
Fair. Yeah, you know, I'm the pessimistic one, so I always give the worst case scenario. So.
But to me, the worst case scenario is you've got a really good special teams guy and you've got a good depth linebacker. That's not a bad case scenario for a linebacker. especially for a fourth-round pick. Or sorry, fifth-round pick. Fifth-round pick.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. The unknown tweeter asks, do you guys think Quinn will have our corners play a side of the field only? You know, the way Sherman plays one side.
Yes. Trufant on the left. Alford on the right. Don't complicate things. They're both extremely good corners. Alford has very high potential if he could cut down on his mistakes. And I think if you do that, I think if you play him on one side and you don't match him up with the number 2 like they were doing last year, it does end up giving you a better overall scheme, better overall team. Sherman may not match up with the number 1, but they do respect his side. I think you'll see the same with Trufant very early, especially if he starts intercepting passes instead of just knocking them away.
I don't really know what the answer is because I think part of it is I think the likelihood is yes, they will play one side of the field. I do think it will be interesting though if Quinn is Quinn and Smith are really about putting the players in the position where they can win. I thought Trufant did an excellent job last year being that shadow number 1 corner, and I do think if they're going to build a scheme around the talent you already have, I think you can make a case that they could continue to do that. So I don't really have an answer. I think it could go either way, but if I was betting, I'd probably say it'll be a left corner and a right corner. That'll be about it.
And that's fair. I mean, I do think that you're going to see that early. You might not see the shadow corner until later in the year if they do it. But early on, starting out, I do think it's left and right. No questions asked.
Probably. All right. Swaggy PhD asks, Mark with a C, James, feels strongly that the Birds shouldn't pay Julio big money. What say you?
I mean, Skip Bayless gets paid for takes like this one. It's a Baylessian take, is all it is. It's a guy trying to make a name for himself with a stupid thought and putting it on the radio.
I will say this. I think in principle, I agree that the Falcons or really no NFL team should pay big money for a number 1 receiver. I think number 1 receivers are probably the most overrated position in the NFL. But I think the Falcons are in a situation where they don't really have an option. They just don't have the sort of talent to let a player like Julio, who's their best player, who is one of 2, maybe 3 if you count Jake Matthews, top tier players in their offense to go. And for us as fans, if they don't have Julio on this team, short of them basically nailing the running back pick, a wide receiver pick, and a tight end pick all this offseason, there ain't going to be a whole lot to really love and watch on Sundays outside of Julio. So I think they should pay him, but I do understand the point of not paying number 1 wide receivers. $90 million like Julio's going to get.
That thought makes sense of not paying a number 1 wide receiver that much money. When you look at the teams that number 1 wide receivers get paid that money, the quarterbacks aren't great. Matt Stafford. He's just slightly better than Andy Dalton.
I wouldn't disagree with that. Yeah, it's true.
Carson Palmer. He's just slightly worse than Andy Dalton. Matt Shaw. He was Andy Dalton before there was Andy Dalton. Talking about Andre Johnson's contract.
Yeah.
Matt Ryan is a lot better than any of those 3 guys. Matt Ryan's a top 8 to 10 range quarterback.
True.
So Falcons aren't thinking about getting rid of him anytime soon. And And because of that, they're not going to get rid of Julio anytime soon. And the only way to keep Julio is to give him big money. So screw it, get him. You got the money. You can focus your cap around it. I remember a couple years ago there was discussion about Matt Ryan. You give Matt Ryan the big money or not? Of course you do. He's a franchise quarterback. Well, Julio Jones is that receiver for that franchise quarterback.
Yeah.
Do you think the Colts had any trouble paying Marvin Harrison and then later Reggie Wayne when it came to keeping Peyton Manning happy?
No, they didn't.
That's why the whole idea of this is dumb. You pay Julio Jones, you make him happy, you make Matt Ryan happy, you make the offensive coordinator happy who came in and said, oh yeah, I love Julio Jones, and the head coach happy who came in and said, yeah, we're going to keep that guy. And his opening press conference was like, yeah, we're going to keep Julio. Come on, man. I'm not stupid.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're in a situation where, I think with the same case with Matt Ryan, you don't really have what's your alternative? What's your option B? There is none. I mean, you let go, if you don't pay Matt Ryan, then you let him go. And then you could be in a situation where you wait 15 years before you get another decent quarterback. I think unless the Falcons had another young wide receiver waiting in the rings that they had in Antonio Brown so they could allow Mike Wallace to walk like the Steelers did a couple of years ago, until that day happens, and you pretty much have no other choice to pay other than pay Julio.
So, I mean, they still got Roddy.
Roddy's going to be retired in 2 years.
I agree. I'm just saying, they still got Roddy. Like, you think they're going to let go of Julio Jones? They didn't even let Roddy walk.
Yeah.
This would be the year to let him walk. And they're just like, don't get me wrong, I love Roddy White. He's been with the Falcons, a decade. It's tough to hate him. Anybody who's with the Falcons for a decade and suffers as much as the rest of the fans did and grew up in Charleston as a Falcons fan, I mean, you got to respect that.
Yeah.
So.
All right. We got a couple of questions from Ryan O'Brien. He asks, I am not a Lamar Holmes fan, and I want him gone. What are your guys' thoughts on him?
I think your wish is going to come true this offseason because he is not a good fit for the zone blocking scheme by any means. I thought he was a solid pass blocker last year. I thought he was an awful run blocker. The problem is, you normally take guys who are solid pass blockers and awful run blockers, throw them in the zone blocking scheme, and you've got a decent fit right there. He has no athleticism to speak of to play in the zone blocking scheme. He's not a guy that can go out there and run and do all that. I like Lamar Holmes. I think it's time for Atlanta to let him go. If they can trade him and get, a sixth-round pick out of him, do it. Just, you can get depth for tackle cheap in the mid to late rounds. You don't need Lamar Holmes. You're better off just letting him go.
Hard to disagree with that. The one thing I will say is when Lamar Holmes was coming out of Southern Miss, I did think he was very light on his feet for a guy his size, which made me think he could potentially fit in a zone blocking scheme. The problem is he's too heavy. And because he's too heavy, he doesn't move as quickly as he should, despite the fact that he has pretty light feet for a guy his size. So I would say this about Holmes if he's going to stick in Atlanta. He basically needs to drop like 20 pounds this offseason. If he does that, then I think he'll be fine. But, that's easier said than done.
If he drops 20 pounds and moves the guard, keep him. Because he could be that left guard that, I don't think Justin Blaylock is going to be here much longer. Because he's only got 2 years left on his contract, and I can see them cutting him after this next year.
Yeah, that's fine.
And have a way cheaper option in Holmes. But I don't think that Holmes if he sticks around, he needs to lose a lot of weight. The guard.
Yeah. All right, Ryan's got a second question. If Sean Phillips could be brought in for a decent contract, should we do it? He's 34 years old, but still a good situational pass rusher.
No. I'm tired of these OC Band-Aids. I'm tired of these Troy Bierman types that we're expecting to have these great seasons. You've already got guys who are better than Sean Phillips right now on the roster. I think Mapanga, Goodman, and Massaquoi are better fits for the defense than Phillips is. You're not ruining a 34. He's not playing outside linebacker. Let Phillips stay in the AFC. Let him stay away anywhere but Atlanta. I'm tired of these aging pass rushers that can't get to the quarterback. Give me a pass rusher that can get to the quarterback and has a ton more talent. Maybe during the middle of last season, if he was cut, sure, you sign him. But right now, it's a waste of time.
Well, I will take the devil's advocate stance here. I don't disagree with anything you said, Scott, but just for the sake of argument. I think if you're going to make the argument for why you signed Sean Phillips, it was 2 years ago in Denver where Richard Smith was. He was a pretty good pass rusher for the Broncos when Von Miller was suspended. I think if you can sign him to a 1-year veteran minimum deal and basically just say we're going to bring him in so that some of these young pass rushers that we're going to draft or we already have on our roster can see, get some tutelage from an older veteran, and he's not guaranteed that, you give him like a $25,000 signing bonus, basically where he's in a situation where you can basically cut him and not blink. Then I think he's worth being a body in camp, but that's really all he is at this point in his career. I wouldn't sign him thinking, oh, he's going to definitely make the team and he's going to definitely be a contributor. He's just a guy that you kind of bring in camp to see, hey, what else you got left in the tank, and if you got a little bit of something as the fourth defensive end, then sure, why not?
I mean, yeah, I'm not a fan.
All right, our last question comes from T.C. Lassard, Tyler Lassard. Current roster fits for the front seven, Sam linebacker, Leo, etc. I plan on not hearing a name beginning with WORR.
Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but there's your starting middle linebacker. And his very easy stuff to run, play middle zone, and blitz role, a.k.a. everything that he's good at. And I hate to burst your bubble with Aaron, as Aaron probably agrees with me on that one.
Maybe. Tyler, I think, it's a question of current roster fits. There's a lot of guys currently on the team that fit, the sort of roles that we're talking about in the front seven, if you're looking at the sort of Seahawks template. The issue is, and I'm sure Scott probably disagrees with me, I think some of these guys are more stopgaps as opposed to long-term fits. They're just kind of guys that, he's good enough to play the Leo this year, but hopefully next year we'll find someone better. So I think for the most part, if you're looking at guys that are long-term fits, I'd probably say Peters at the 1 technique that Brandon Meebane played. I'd probably say Hageman at that 5 technique that Red Bryant played. If Sean Weatherspoon could stay healthy, I'd put him at the weak side spot. But everybody else is kind of just a situational, rotational guy long-term, including the guy that starts with WOR.
I was going off of guys who have contracts right now, not including Spoon or Peters.
That's fair. And they're currently not on the roster, so I guess technically they don't count.
So going based off that idea, Sproul at weak side linebacker, Warlow in the middle, Shembo on the strong side. Makes the most sense for me. At nose, you've got Soliai. At 3, you've got Hageman. And then Goodman plays that 5 over Tyson Jackson, just because Tyson Jackson sucks. And then I'd have Massaquoi as the leader.
I think all those fits work. I think, again, my issue is I don't know if all of those guys are sort of, that's the guy we want playing that spot. My thing is I think the Falcons' goal should be, 2 or 3 years from now, we're going to have a really good defense. We're going to have top 5, top 10 defense. And I don't know how many of those guys are going to be in those spots at that point in time. So that's where my discrepancy is. But if you just need a guy that can kind of bridge the gap over the next 2 years, I think you just named several of them. So that's our show, Scott. That's it. That's all of our mailbag questions. We will be back next week. I'm assuming that we will be talking about the scouting combine.
That'll be one of the things we talk about.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll find some other player that I hate and Scott likes to squash the beef on. People can, if they have any suggestions, then they can tweet me at FalcFans. They can tweet Scott at Scott Karasik. Tweet the show at Falcons PFC. If you want to harass our boss, Brian Harrington, at PF Central on Twitter, by all means, do that. He enjoys it. We enjoy it. If you want to ask a mailbag question that we can answer, use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag, and we'll definitely be able to see it. And, check out Scott's stuff on Bleacher Report. Check out my stuff on FalcFans.com. And that's it.
I mean, yeah. Have a great week. We'll see you in about a week. Aaron's got the weirdest schedule in the world.
Yeah,
so
I apologize in advance.
We'll figure this one out. But if you're one of our regular Tuesday listeners and you made it to Monday, awesome. If you listen to us at a random time throughout the rest of the week, well, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.